hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining this session. I'm delighted that we will be joined by some real experts in this area. And the area we're going to be discussing for the next 45 minutes is, I think, something that was phrased many years ago when people looked at the rate of development of China and tried to stratify it in terms of different categorizations of growth. At that time, there were various different tiers that were categorized. Tier 1 cities, which typically were eastern seaboard cities in China, and clearly Beijing, Shenzhen as well, and obviously Shanghai. And then there was a categorization of tiers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and beyond. And I think nowadays maybe that tiering system is a little bit antiquated and out of date, but yet we still refer to lower tier cities in China, which I think is slightly misleading on a number of different dimensions. First of all, of course, many of those cities, categorized as lower tier cities, have absolutely massive and large populations. And indeed, many of those cities' disposable incomes of consumers in the third and fourth tier cities may well be larger than the disposable incomes of consumers in the first and second tiers because of the disparity of principally of housing prices. But one of the things that we have heard about over the course of the last few days is the massive opportunities there are now through digital with consumers in lower tier cities, and gaining access through digital means to products and brands that may not have been there physically in those tier cities before. So it's really, really important for you to gain a good understanding of lower tier cities in China, for you to assess and understand the big opportunities that are there and clearly how to access those. And I'm absolutely delighted that we are being joined by Perez, who is the General Manager and Head of Strategy for Mindshare in China, and Qinxin, who is the Partner for Strategy for Mindshare China as well. A very, very warm welcome to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Hello, thank you very much, David. We're very happy to be part of this session today.
Fantastic. Well, both of you are joining us live from Shanghai. So I know it's getting sort of late in the afternoon, and given all the 11/11 activity that I know that you and the Mindshare team are involved in, it's great that you managed to carve out a little bit of time for us. The way in which we're going to run this session is I'm going to hand over to the two of you, and then towards the end of the presentation and discussion, we'll have a good discussion and pick up some of the points that you've raised. So over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, David. So thank you again, everyone. So again, as David mentioned, we're here to cover opportunities within the lower tier cities in China. The way that we're going to cover this would be in three parts. First would be to give you a bit more background introduction to what it means to be in the lower tiers. Like David already gave a good background of it, but we'll give you some more information to really understand the massive scale and opportunity within these areas of China. Second part will be, we'll profile them in terms of their different behaviors, what are the misconceptions on how they consume channels, content, and commerce, and then how do we move forward in terms of implications, right? So for any brand who wants to enter China, how do we inform your go-to-market strategies for us to maximize the lower tier opportunities in the market? So let's start with, again, giving an introduction of the lower tiers. Everyone knows China is the most populated country in the world. There are actually almost 700 plus cities in China. And as David mentioned, several institutions have tried to sort of categorize these cities in terms of economic development, in terms of the population, in terms of its relation to the government, whether it's directly reporting to the central government or administrative local governments, right? So there's actually no standardized categorization. Each body, each institution, whether it be private or public, has several ways to classify these tiers. But broadly speaking, they're more or less similar. So when we say tiering, right, there are different levels to it. Broadly speaking, there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4. As David mentioned, your tier 1 cities will be your biggest, most economically advanced cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, where really for the past few decades, the biggest growth has come from these cities. And then you would have your tier 2 cities, which are more or less your capitals of certain provinces or prefectures. And then as you go to tier 3, tier 4, these are other cities that are smaller in scale. When I say upper tier, I'm really referring to tiers 1 and tier 2. And then lower tiers, which actually comprise most of the cities, right? And almost like 70% of the Chinese population would be within your tiers 3 and 4, 5, 6, etc. So these are what we consider lower tiers, in which a lot of the growth now is coming from. But when we say, when we say lower tier and when we say like rural China, right, the biggest misconception is that maybe it's very not so developed. Maybe you see a lot of like forests and, there's not a lot of infrastructure and they're small. As David mentioned, this is a big misconception. If you actually look at the different lower tiers cities in China, they're economically advanced. In terms of population, they are similar to whole countries in the world, right? They're highly urbanized, right? Yes, they are less robust in terms of the economy or infrastructure compared to the upper tiers. However, if you compare it to world standards, they're actually quite big cities. So I would call them, instead of small, they're really just less big in terms of China standards. And so we talk a lot about lower tiers, and a lot of our clients are really like, how do we win in lower tiers? How do we penetrate these different markets? It's because of several reasons. First would be there's projection on continued economic development, right? The government is putting in a lot of effort in terms of developing special economic zones concerning lower tier cities. And thereby, you see a very big leap in terms of affluence and average incomes. And so with these developments, you also have better talent retention. So more and more people are choosing to stay within lower tier cities. And at the same time, you see a very, very big rise of the middle class population within the lower tier cities as well, which leads to consumption, right? By 2030, which is not very far away from now, right? It's estimated by the government actually that 2/3 of national consumption growth will be driven by the lower tiers. And when we say consumption, it's really from a variety, from a big variety, right? We're seeing them consuming across different categories, whether it be travel, whether it be household goods, or even luxury, where within the luxury space, there's a lot of talk about the lower tiers being the new frontier of the luxury category, where more and more they're being more exposed to brands, right? And they have the money and they're willing to spend on brands, both foreign and local as well. And that also translates to our big topic on e-commerce, right? So last year, actually, the growth in e-commerce in China was largely driven by the lower tiers, and it's continued to projected to do so, right? Lower tier penetration in Double 11 is expected to increase again this year. The upper tier penetration within Double 11 is already saturating. So really a lot of the first-time participants in Double 11, and as well as your other big shopping festivals in China, is largely being driven by these lower tier markets. But another misconception is, so when we talk to our different clients, right, like when they ask, how do we win in lower tiers? And oftentimes when we have these conversations, there's a big misconception that lower tiers, meaning like 70% of the China population, it's kind of like we're treating them as a big homogeneous monolithic group. Whereas because of that scale in the population, and of course each of these cities are also quite affluent, right? It's quite diverse in terms of different contexts, in terms of different cultures, in terms of different regions. And so what we're trying to really push is that let's not think about lower tiers as one big group, but then rather a series or different clusters of different markets that have varying nuances. And so, for example, here I just listed down certain regions. So, for example, Northeast China or Fujian or Southern China, right? Each of these different regions or clusters of cities would have their own cultural nuances, would have their own local rituals, even their own local media environments that we need to customize for. If we really want to appeal to lower tiers, we need to see the kaleidoscope of different cities and different regions for us to customize our marketing and communication approach, right? To really connect with the local people and to really connect with the culture in these areas. And so when we deliver growth, right, that will affect us in terms of media, in terms of our go-to-market strategies. And so for today, we really look into how do we profile and really understand these lower tier markets, right? Conducting research within the lower tiers is also quite challenging, right? Because of the scale and because of the variations. But for today, let's look at different aspects, right, on what we've seen on platforms, meaning media channels. Second would be on the types of content that they like. Third would be on how they're influenced by your Wang Hong or the KOLs within China, which have become very, very big in the market. Fourth would be on experiences that are both online and offline. Fourth would be on new retail. So in terms of commerce and how commerce is becoming a big part of the whole digital ecosystem, where in China, when we say commerce, it's not just about Tmall or Alibaba, right? Commerce is present across different platforms. And then sixth and lastly would be, the household, right? Because China is a very family-centered country in terms of its culture. What are some insights in terms of appealing to the lower tier household structure? So let's start with platforms or media channels. So one big misconception is that the higher tier markets are much more digitized than lower tier markets. But in fact, if we look at the data, right, in terms of online platform penetration, they're more or less the same. If we look at the penetration across different key apps in China, including, of course, WeChat, which is, the super app of China, as well as Taobao, your big e-commerce platform, or Douyin, right? Douyin is the TikTok of China, right? Where TikTok actually originated from this market, as well as other key apps. More or less, we can see that the lower tier markets are really not far behind in terms of penetration within these media channels. So more or less, they're also highly digitized. They're using more or less the same apps or the same platforms. But there are also some other stereotypes in terms of digital media. So for example, when we talk about digital, there will be some talks on some platforms really work better in lower tiers. So for example, Kuaishou here, the one with the orange app, it's often seen as, this is the Douyin or the TikTok for the lower tiers, but really, right, it's also quite high in the upper tier markets and not just in lower tier, right? Or group buying or other platforms around local news. Oftentimes, we see these apps as lower tier platforms, but they're actually quite popular in the upper tiers as well. But on the reverse side, you're also seeing apps like Bilibili, for example, which is the biggest comic and gaming animation sort of platform in China, as well as other apps like Keep, which is this fitness app that's becoming very popular in the market. Oftentimes, these are seen as apps for upper tiers, right? But if you actually look at the active users within these apps, the lower tier markets are not far behind. They are also into these top trending apps. They also use these platforms, and they're highly digitized as well. Another would be around video. So in China, when we look at the different video platforms like an iQIYI or a Tencent Video, within these video platforms, you can subscribe to become like VIP members. So similar to like a premium sort of subscription where you get more access to more types of content and more premium content, right? Oftentimes we say that, oh, these VIP or premium subscriptions would only be popular in the upper tiers. But actually, if we look at the data, again, lower tier markets are also not far behind in terms of these VIP subscriptions. Another one would be on short videos, right? In China, when there are some versions of apps, like for example, a Douyin or a TikTok, there are simplified versions of apps. So these simplified versions of apps originated from before where, perhaps there are some areas in China which have less mobile internet services. And so people would need a simplified version of these apps. And oftentimes these apps, right, the misconception is these apps are for lower tiers. But actually, not really. Your lower tiers, because of great infrastructure, mobile internet is big, they're highly digitized. It's not anymore that the lighter or simplified versions of apps are for lower tiers, right? It's changing more and more because these areas are becoming highly digitized, right, and highly active within different key platforms or even emerging platforms in the market. But when we talk about outside digital, right, let's also talk about like more traditional media. TV, for example, is still dominant, but we were seeing in terms of growth that it's been decreasing over time. But then you also see rapid growth in terms of online TV, especially within the lower tiers, right? More and more people are subscribing to these online TV platforms, and also more and more people are getting smart TVs, have better screens or even multiple screens in the household. Whereas, for example, when we look at outdoor, there are also still some nuances, right? Because physically, these different cities would also have varying infrastructures in terms of transportation, in terms of outdoor media that is available. So, for example, in tier 1 and tier 2 cities, we're seeing outdoor advertising that are very prevalent in your subway stations, your big metropolitan areas. Whereas, sure, the tier 4 and tier 3 cities are also very urbanized, but they may not have the same level of infrastructure on subways, or in terms of your central business districts, right? Perhaps even some of these cities would have fewer malls or fewer commercial areas. And so when we talk about outdoor, it's also a nuanced context there, wherein your outdoor advertising is more within the supermarkets, within community areas, or within like very central city centers that are core to very local context where people gather, right? So there are some nuances when you also talk about outdoor within traditional media. And then we go into content, right? So when we talk about content, again, there's this misconception that, oh, the lower tiers are not as digitized. Maybe they don't have the same sort of leisure activities as the upper tiers. But actually, the lower tiers are also very much into your long video, which is your online TV, and also your short videos. They're very much active in that. And also with gaming, because China is such a big gaming market. It's actually one of the biggest, where mobile gaming is something that's of a staple. Like everyone just does mobile gaming. and as well as your more immersive entertainment or more immersive experiences. So these would include, for example, online and offline pop-ups and activities, which I'll go through later on. So these, for example, when we say gaming and immersive entertainment, they're both IRL, so in real life, and also URL, which is online. In China, it's inevitable that we talk about the marriage of like online and offline because that's such an integral part of the ecosystem. And that's also very true in the lower tiers, not just in the upper tiers. So for example, they're also very much into social gaming, right? Wherein these mobile gaming becomes a way for people to connect, right? People to also have their own social identities or their own metaverse sort of identities within these different gaming platforms. And this is also becoming very, very popular in the lower tiers, especially because actually, factually, they also have more leisure time within the lower tiers. Second would be on, again, immersive entertainment, right? Or in real life, actual offline activities, but also enhanced by digital. So actually, if you look at immersive activations that brands are doing, or even the number of music festivals in China, there's a significant increase of these different cultural and leisure activations, not just in the upper tier, but also in lower tiers. More and more, the music festivals or even like even gaming competitions are being held into these lower tier cities because there is a big demand for this kind of experiences and entertainment within the lower tiers, not just in the upper tiers. And when we talk about content, right, in China, it's also inevitable that we talk about different types of TV drama and video. So TV dramas, variety shows, in similar to other parts of Asia, this is a very, very, very big thing in China. But when we look at the types of shows, for example, that are or the genres that are popular, you don't really see a wide variety on the types of shows. However, the actual shows can be the appeal can vary across different cities or city tiers as well because of different local customs, because of different regional developments. So for example, perhaps in certain regions, more fantasy, rural life, sort of grassroots sort of types of variety shows are more popular, whereas for example in other upper tier cities, for example, they would have a different sort of content or programs that appeal to them. So for example, the way that brands have actually like tried to appeal to different cities and the lower tiers, one would be having this universal approach, right? One would be, for example, shared sentiments around the family. It can be leveraging on like national topics. So for example, when the three-child policy came into place where there's more relaxed restrictions on the number of children in China, this auto company Wuling made an ad on, we have cars that actually fit more people, right? So national events or even top celebrities that are quite popular across. But then again, this whole point about regional variation and really maximizing on that, where we're really also seeing certain brands, especially local brands, that really tailor their communication as well as different product assortments towards different regions. So for example, there are certain IPs or certain intellectual property collaborations that are popular in certain regions. So we've seen brands tailor their marketing or even they customize certain product offerings specific to that IP, specific to our region, for example. And another example will be, of course, in southern China, there's a very, very big tea culture. So we're also seeing some brands or even some platforms leveraging on certain cultural rituals, right, that appeal to this region, and then they leverage that for their own marketing to push products or to push specific consumption moments. So that's it for me. I'll hand it to Chin for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. So the one thing that is constantly being associated with content is actually influencers. And you'll see that consumers in lower tiers are equally influenced by the KOLs as those in upper tiers. So on the next slide, you see the key difference really lies in the style of the KOLs and the content that they produce. So diving the KOLs type that lower tiers prefer, we actually find that consumers in lower tiers like KOLs that can help them with store discoveries. So for example, uncovering new restaurants or new places of entertainment like karaoke lounges or even indoor sports activities. So this type of KOLs that can help with the store discovery will generally have more followers and higher popularity amongst the lower tiers consumers as well. Then in terms of content, you see on the next slide, upper tiers prefer a more sophisticated and elaborated kind of content with multiple cameras, viewpoint, with background music, almost like a short film if you ask me. But for lower tiers consumers, they actually prefer a more straightforward video treatment. So more direct, more candid, sometimes even with the use of local dialects and set in an everyday context kind of environment will suit better with the lower tiers consumers. So besides understanding the KOL types and content style to cater to lower tiers consumers, there's also the rise of key opinion businesses in lower tiers to help brands push for conversions. So think KOBs, like your community-based brand ambassadors. They can be the sales consultants based in your offline stores. They are usually people who can become your brand advocates because they know your brand and products inside out. KOBs also can leverage platforms like WeChat Enterprises or private community chat groups to connect with a small base of high-value customers within 1 kilometer of the offline store itself. So KOBs really act as a specialist in the chat group. They can provide advices to queries and concerns from these high-value customers, and at the same time be the first one to push through any new offers or any new product recommendations to this high-value community as well. Now moving on to experiences, you see that experiences are increasingly playing an important role for lower tiers consumers with more leisure time on hand. Like what Jerry mentioned earlier, there's also smaller city radius. All the downtown activities are concentrated in one single area. It means to us that lower tiers consumers can now spend more time to engage with brands and to physically try out products in store, especially when we see that they still find shopping in a mall more reliable in terms of quality, and they also tend to prefer to buy from offline retail stores as well. Hence, the important thing for us to do is really to find ways to integrate their high digital penetration with offline experiences to drive greater performance for brands. Here's an example on the next slide from a dairy brand called Ili, where you see that they can improve the brand awareness through a multimedia approach across different platforms, across different cities as well. This, at the same time, is also synced with key offline activations across 5 crowded CBD areas in different cities, so as to encourage, after someone from lower tier cities have seen the ad online, they can then move to participate in the offline activation and hence purchase offline as well. Another case is from a beverage brand where they leverage the media ecosystem to drive an online to offline integration. So Hunan TV is a traditional provincial TV network that invested in a digital arm called Mango TV. For their new product, Hearty Breakfast Coconut Juice, this beverage brand launched on both Hunan TV and Mango TV. They drive traffic to land on the TV network social commerce platform called Little Mango, thereby successfully seeding this new product as a Wang Hong product and also at the same time pushing for conversions. And then extending this beyond just media resources and a commerce platform exchange, the product placements was also seen in locally produced variety shows such as Who's the Murderer, and also in pop-up game sets that was set up by this Hunan TV and Mango TV offline, so as to further remind and engage the lower tiers consumers to buy and to engage with the brand further. Now, speaking of O2O experiences, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the concept of new retail, which was first coined by Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. It was to describe how offline, online, logistics, data, and many other different variables converging to form an integrated retail sector to enhance the consumer shopping experiences. So today, what we want to share with you is that new retail cuts across upper and lower tiers, and the key difference lies in the type of offline and online commerce channels that's popular between these two. So you'll see that for offline, independent supermarkets work very well with upper tiers, whereas convenience stores work well across all tiers. And lower tiers actually prefer medium-sized supermarkets and is over-indexing on grocery stores, which is your mini marts owned by individual owners, and free market. Free market here is defined like your kind of like a flea market that operates only in specific time frame for a very short duration. Then as for online sales channel, on the right hand side of the slide, you can see that the penetration rate and the growth rate of online commerce store is growing across all tiers as well, with very prominent growth rates seen in the lower tiers. Now, we have seen the difference in online and offline commerce channels by city tiers, but for lower tiers to truly embrace the concept of new retail, which is the integration of online and offline sales channels, we see that lower tiers definitely have room to grow, largely due to their logistics and supply chain limitations in lower tiers market at the moment. So to facilitate new retail in lower tiers, one way or one approach that we think of is through pop-up stores. Basically bring the logistics and supplies to the doorsteps of consumers in lower tiers. On this slide, you'll see that statistics-wise, which is a lot, if you look at the last column, you will see that pop-up store contribution to sales in lower tiers is actually similar to that of the tier 2 and is way higher than that of tier 1. So really, if we want to push forth new retail, is really to do a lot more, is really bring the supplies, bring the logistics to the doorsteps of these lower tier cities. Now moving on to household, we talk about how we can find new consumer segments in lower tiers, and one of the biggest change in lower tiers in the past few years is really facilitated by different factors. One of which was government policies. There's the relaxed child planning policy that has taken place in July 2021, which encourages families to start giving birth to the third child. And as you see that there's a lot less financial pressures as we see more families or working adults becoming more affluent in lower tiers. So more and more so they can afford a bigger family, afford having more kids in the family. And at the same time, because they have this work-life balance in lower tiers, they can spend more time taking care of their children, raising their kids. And as a whole, we see that from a demographic perspective, proportion of youth, which is like the post 2000s, so the millennials and the elderly residents actually have higher percentage in lower tiers as compared to the higher tiers, upper tiers kind of a population demographic. So to us, what does this really mean is that we see that from a household consumer growth perspective, big families as an audience group is really becoming more mainstream in lower tiers, as you see elder residents with the working adults population combining with the new generation's youth as one family household is one that we should reach out and target. And so how should we reach out to them? There are various marketing opportunities to connect with these big families in lower. Here are some examples that we have raised. We think that a lot as big families go out to have fun, they usually visit amusement parks. So there's one way to collaborate with amusement park with their IPs, be it developing co-branded products or really having some thematic activation that is very Instagram worthy so that they can share on their social media. The other way is to identify key local festival events to be part of. So one of the example raised here was Huaiyang Longhu Lotus Tourism has a celebration month to develop new experiences for local family travel groups. So that's something that we can leverage existing resources or existing festivals, existing IPs to amplify our brands and products in the process. Then last but not least is about self-creation, creating that kind of moments to connect with your big families. So it could be demonstrating our brand relevance in creating an ambient outdoor experience, creating new landmarks that can help deliver these immersive experiences for families to enjoy during key festivals like maybe the cherry blossoms time frame or during the CNY festivals or even during Golden Week as well. So as a whole, what does it really mean for brands? Here are some key takeaways that we have summarized. Firstly, it's really about nuanced understanding. We need to invest in research so that we can understand deeper about what triggers different city tiers, what triggers different consumer segments within the lower tier cities for us to develop a more targeted and relevant brand presence. And secondly, it's really about avoiding sweeping statements saying that I want to target lower tiers, but specifying which micro segments because of the nuanced behaviors towards consumption, towards content, towards platform. We need to specify the different micro segments, identifying which one that is more relevant and best relatable to the brand that we wish to communicate and conquer as well. So segmentations and customization is very important for us when we approach lower tiers. And then thirdly, it's about prioritizing your markets. So like what Jerry mentioned earlier, there's a lot of cities in lower tiers, and every city comes at different growth rate with different differences in terms of opportunities. So what we really need to do is to go through what is important for the brand, identifying what cities, think of it like a market prioritization. We need to evaluate what type of cities and doing different cities clusters to reach out to them accordingly to address the brand's brief. And then last but not least is about keeping track of what is the government policies in the market. So paying close attention to China policies and regulations from government, because this tends to influence cities' development and growth opportunities for brands. Like the relaxing of the child policy actually encourages more birth rate in the lower tiers compared to the upper tiers. Yeah. So with that, we end off today's sharing on the opportunities in lower tiers. We'll pass it back to David.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Qin and Jerry. I think you really have busted the myth that lower tier cities in China should be lower priority. In fact, probably the reverse is true now, that lower tier cities in China should be the highest priority. Perhaps you can just give us your thoughts on this, which is, I suppose the more traditional ways of brands entering China was to enter China into the tier 1 and 2 cities, and then after having established there, to move on to the lower tier cities. There might be many people watching this broadcast who have yet to take the decision to put their foot on the acceleration button or lever for China development, or putting their brands in China, be it physically or digitally. Do you think it is now completely feasible to have a market entry strategy in China that actually starts in some of those lower tier cities, as opposed to Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that question. I think it's definitely possible. In fact, we have seen a lot of local brands starting from lower tiers before they expand up to upper tiers, primarily for a few reasons. I think upper tiers advertisement is fairly cluttered, if you agree. And there's also a lot of opportunities for us to work with the lower tiers first, because they are fairly acceptable to new changes at this point in time, fairly acceptable to new brands and new products as well. So it's definitely a good approach to consider for new brands entering China market to start with lower tiers marketing.
Yeah.
Now,
and to add to that as well, right? So there's also a challenge on the other side of the coin where, sure, they're also very open, right? So it's a big opportunity. They're very much open to new brands, but then also, a foreign brand needing to enter these lower tier markets would really need to have a very, very, very good understanding of the local nuances, especially the local features, because these lower tier cities also tend to be less cosmopolitan, less international, yet open, right? But still, right, a lot of the local brands also have a very, very good stronghold on the lower tiers. So it's not like there's less competition. There's still competition, especially from lower tier brands. So for anyone who wants to enter, there really needs to be more research, more investment on different regional and cultural nuances to really succeed in the lower tiers, right? We don't want to make it sound like, oh, like it's a, you know, it's a big opportunity and it's easy to do so. There will be challenges as well.
So I suppose the message is there might be a big opportunity in lower tier cities, but you still have to have an amazingly strong value proposition and product proposition to make sure that your product and the way in which you're communicating it can cut through the strength of the players that are currently existing in the marketplace.
Yeah,
correct. Yeah.
Perhaps you could explain a little bit more about the whole concept of key opinion business, because I think people are probably very familiar with key opinion leaders. And now you've thrown another one into the mix. So perhaps you can talk a little bit more about how that has originated and what that means.
I don't know if you are familiar with the idea of key opinion consumers, because they also think, KOCs, right? So that's also something that when I first entered into the China landscape and market, I first heard of it. More and more so these days, it has also started to develop and evolve into KOB, key opinion businesses, because we see that consumers, while they are the ones buying our products, they can also potentially become our advocates. There's no one stopping a store consultants or brand ambassadors, beauty advisors behind the counters to become the community-based advocates for your brand. So rather than paying for someone who is a KOL who has this mass wide reach in the social network space that has the lack of a down to earth, has a lack of a sense of bonding with your consumers, we tend to approach it from the other side of the spectrum, which is the KOCs, which is now then developed into a KOB's kind of an idea, which is your community-based consultants, because these people are also in a way laymen, are also in a way consumers who can connect directly with your high-value customers.
Correct. So for example, right, the platforms are also responding to this. We're all familiar with WeChat, right? The social app, the biggest social app in China, but now there's also WeChat Enterprise. So what happens is if you go to different retail stores, so for example, if you go to a Nike store, right, or even smaller shops, the different brand ambassadors or the salespeople in the shop would have their WeChat Enterprise account that's linked to the business, right? And they're able to add customers entering the store into this WeChat group, right? And then even when the customers are outside the store, they can engage with the sales assistant. If they want to buy clothing, even though they're outside the store already, they can receive customer service, they can get updates or even promotional deals, right? By being part of these WeChat groups, right?
And those WeChat groups, Jerry, are they related to the individual sales assistant in those stores, or are they store-wide groups?
So in COVID, during the COVID period, it used to be that the sales assistants used their personal WeChat, but then WeChat rolled out WeChat Enterprise, right, in which the businesses will have greater control on how they want to set it up. So the consumer data is actually tied to the business, but then the salespeople are just fronting and using that common account, and they can customize it depending on how they want to set it up across different stores.
Well, we could carry on this conversation for a long time. The length of the opportunity that there is in the lower tier cities, but unfortunately we are going to have to stop. It's been very enlightening, and I think you've really well illustrated that whilst people might initially think Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen maybe is where the opportunity lies, I think you have well demonstrated that there is a massive opportunity, and I think one of your early charts talked about the percentage of sales in China that's going to be accounted for by what we currently call lowest tier cities, and the huge percentage of that is going to be, and I think that illustrates it immensely. And I think to summarize, lower tier cities in China now should be high priority cities in China. So a massive thanks to you, Jerry, General Manager and Head of Strategy for Mindshare in China, and also to you, Qinxin, who is the partner for strategy, also at Mindshare in China. Many thanks. We'll let you get back to the business of 11/11. I'm sure it's very busy for you. Have a great evening, and thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David.
David.